Hello YouTube, welcome to another video from FS Pro in my series of videos for scenery in X-Plane 10. Today is a very happy departure from the series that I had created in advance, because following my review of the World to X-Plane add-on from Tony, I'm delighted to say that the piece of scenery which he had, I guess, pre-announced at the time is now available. So today I'm going to do a video on something called GB Pro Scenery version 0.1. So you can see the details for it here on the screen, and of course the link to download it should you decide to do so. And frankly, after seeing it, I can't imagine why you would not. But let's have a quick flick through. There are some screenshots here that Tony has added in, as well as at the bottom some details about the product itself. Just a reminder that this is in a beta phase, it's not quite ready for worldwide domination yet, so treat it accordingly. And down here you'll notice that to install it you just do the normal X-Plane goodness and copy this stuff into your custom scenery folder. There's a little note here to make sure that you put it in the correct location, and it's a very handy tip, otherwise your results will be variable. There's also a potential gotcha here in that Tony mentions that you need to install the latest version of World models. Now, when I first tried to install this GB Pro, I didn't have the latest World models. Although my World models were installed in February of this year, that's not recent enough because Tony updated them in conjunction with the release of the GB Pro scenery. So if you want to get the most out of this, you're going to have to install the latest version of the World models as well, also downloadable via a link from Tony's site at World to X-Plane. Once all that's installed, it's just a case of starting up X-Plane and using it as per usual. And what I'm going to do to try and show off a little bit of the work that Tony has done is to do a quick trip in the southwest of the UK. I'm going to go from the now closed airport at Plymouth in the southwest and fly up to the northwest towards Exeter. Along the way I'll be flying across Dartmoor, so there's some interesting scenery to view from up there, as well of course as passing through some towns and villages along the way, so you can see the auto-generated scenery that is created with the GB Pro scenery. And let's have a look. There is my copy of X-Plane paused and ready to go. So I am currently situated on the runway in Plymouth. And which way am I headed? I am currently pointing towards the west. Towards the east. I'm on heading 120, actually about 125 here. So I'll need to take off and do a quick turnaround, head in the opposite direction to head towards Exeter. The ADF, or rather the NDB for Exeter, is on 337, which I've already got set down here. The range of that NDB though is only 22.5 miles, so I may not be able to pick it up when I lift off, so I'll just need to head in the general direction until I do pick up the signal, and then I'll be able to home in on that. I'm going to use Plan G on my second monitor over here so I can keep tabs on where I'm flying and how I'm flying. If you've never seen Plan G, it's an excellent tool for doing all sorts of things, including being able to utilize it as a moving map display, which can be quite handy as well. So let's have a quick look outside here first of all. I'm at Plymouth, which as I say is closed, but the runways and everything are still there. But the owners of the site have generally been encroaching ever closer towards the runways and building properties. So let's have a quick look at what we can see out here. Sure enough, you can see a great deal of building all the way around the airport. Now, one thing you may notice here is these buildings are more European in appearance. It's not the standard American constructed houses that we may be accustomed to with auto-generated scenery in X-Plane 10. This does look far more British and adds a bit more to the immersion and the realism in the sim. There are a few odd idiosyncrasies, such as this road, which apparently I'm not really quite sure what that's trying to do there, or this road here, which has a road that suddenly stops, and yet you can see underneath the real road as it's running along here, and how the X-Plane generated roads should in fact go. I'm using the zoom level 16 photo scenery provided at the zonephoto.fr site. If you want to be able to download this and use it for yourselves, it's freely available. Please check out one of my other videos in this series that talks about how to install photo scenery. If I move around, I'm looking down here now towards Plymouth City itself, and now looking up towards the west, across Dartmoor, and the direction I'll be headed in to go towards Exeter. So there we are. That's pretty much the local scenery. Let's get back into the cockpit. I'll unpause and then let's head off. Of course, I've just realised as I'm on a heading of approximately 125, I am headed in the right direction. I need to head east to get to Exeter from Plymouth, or rather northeast, so forgive my poor compass skills here. Let's get going. I'm using the Bell 407 here, and I'm very much a learner helicopter wannabe pilot, so bear with me and chuckle, if you will, some of my undoubted mistakes as we go along. Okay, so I'm going to lift the collective, bit of left foot to accommodate for the undoubted turn I'm going to get. There we go. Back on the stick. Oops. And move to forward. Thrust. And we're off. And let's climb up and away and head in the general direction of Exeter. I don't think there are buildings that tall that close to the end of the runway at the moment, but it's not far off actually. Not far off at all. Okay, so what can I see at the moment? Lots of light industrial buildings around. That's pretty realistic. I'll try and get us into a stable speed and altitude. I'll aim for about 2,000 feet, I think. And also I'm going to head a bit more across towards the northeast as I try and stabilise my climb and speed. And while I'm trying to do that, very badly it would appear, I'm going to try and connect plan G so I can keep an eye on my moving map. Okay, that's not too bad. I could do with a bit more speed perhaps. Some of these are more up pressure on the collective. Try and stabilise at around 100 knots. So, scenery wise, of course, what we're seeing here is a mix between the photo scenery at zoom level 16 and the auto-generated scenery for buildings, farms, trees and so on and so forth as generated by the GB Pro scenery, and together it certainly looks hugely better than the default in X-Plane. Certainly at this kind of altitude, VFR flying altitudes, this is great, and you can navigate by these because the roads are exactly where they should be, the buildings are exactly where they should be, and so on and so forth. So all good stuff. I'll come a bit more across to the northeast. I think, even though we aren't within 22 miles, the NDB signal is still being picked up, so if I head towards that, we should be in good shape. The NDB is not actually on Exeter Airport, it's about 6 miles to the northeast of the airport and is used for approaches into the westerly runway. Nevertheless, this will get us close, and that's what we want. I'm just going to reduce the collective a bit so I can get my speed down to something that's more sensible, and look to maintain 2,000 feet. And if you watch the radar altitude, which is shown on the bottom right of my panel, you'll see that though I'm flying at an altitude of about 2,000 feet, my radar altitude is currently showing about 1,000, and that's because I'm flying over Dartmoor now. See if I can trim the helicopter out a bit now to require a bit less manual input from me. That looks a bit better. Flying a helicopter in X-Plane, I found, is incredibly challenging to get going, and at first I had no end of problem trying to do even the simple things. Well, actually, what I consider to be the simple things of taking off and landing. Turns out, though, that if you do helicopter flying for real, they tend to leave those things until much later in the training. Because it is far more difficult than you realise, and it requires you to coordinate lots of different things. I have done pilot flying for my private pilot's licence in the UK and in the States, in fact, on Cessna 152s and 172s and also Piper PA-28s, and to a great degree, shush, don't tell anybody I told you this, you can almost ignore the rudder pedal except for extreme situations, like you want to do some side slipping before you come into land, and so on and so forth. But with a helicopter, no chance. You're going to come very intimately acquainted with the operation of your rudder pedal, and once you do, being able to fly it becomes a darn sight easier, I have to say. Now, having said all that about how difficult it is to fly a helicopter, my son, who's not remotely interested in flight simulation at all, but is very into online gaming, was here earlier today, and I said to him, here, have a quick go at this, see if you can get a helicopter to take off, fly it around a bit and land it. And I explained briefly what the collective was and that he would need to use the rudder pedals, and sat back waiting to see how many times he would crash. And then he promptly sat down, took hold of the controls, took off, flew around for a little bit, landed it and walked away as if it's something he had always been doing all of his life. I was astonished. Kids, eh? So ahead of us now you can see some more auto-generated scenery over on the right hand side. In fact, we're fairly well trimmed out here, so let's take a bit of a look. Now, bearing in mind that underneath this is photo scenery, what you're seeing is buildings, generated buildings, being correctly positioned, and you can see they're correctly positioned because they're put right on top of where the photograph of the ground shows that they should be. So it's an incredible piece of work, this, with the auto-generated stuff, and bar an odd few idiosyncratic things here and there, by and large it seems to work really well. Oh, take your eye off the aircraft just for a little while and look what happens. We've lost 500 feet and our speed's increasing, and we're about 15 degrees off course. So let's correct that. So the heading is correct now. Climbing up nicely. Speed's a bit more sensible. Try and level off at 2000. No idea what the winds aloft are today. I've just taken off and flown, which is not the right thing to do, of course, but we are in a simulator, so I'm not too vexed about it, and it's a good challenge anyway. Again, you can see the auto-generated roads down there on the right hand side. They're laid almost perfectly on top of the photo scenery roads that you can see underneath. And also at this altitude, 2000 feet, the photo scenery, I think, looks extremely good. I'm sure if we went up a bit higher it would be better still. But at zoom level 16, the frame rates I'm currently getting, as you can see up there on the top left, are around 45 frames per second, and that in conjunction with the GB Pro auto-gen scenery seems to give a very pleasing impression of where we are and where we're going. Let's get a bit more altitude then. The effect that you can see for the horizon is generated by real terra haze, which is an add-on I'll be talking about later on in this series of videos on scenery for X-Plane 10. So if you haven't already, why not subscribe, so you'll get advanced notification as soon as that video becomes ready. Okay, it looks to be fairly good now, fairly well trimmed out, so let's use the trimmer on the helicopter again. Fly over to the left a bit more, so I'll take a closer look at some of the scenery. I have noticed on occasion as I come near to a town or a village, I can get some stuttering. Now, whether that's a feature of the auto-generated scenery or not, I really don't know. If it is, I can't say I'm too concerned at the moment. Tony's been very clear that this is version 0.1 of the product. It's his very first offering for public consumption, and I have absolutely no doubt that he'll be working hard to ensure that it performs just as well as he can get it to perform. Overall, I have to say, I'm enjoying the experience. Let's have a quick look around outside again. Some fairly easily spotted works over there. There's a big sort of China clay industry in the southwest of the UK, around where I live, and I suspect that that's what we're seeing over there as well. Unless you wonder I've gone too far adrift here, heading away to the north. That's because I'm going to try and do a straight-in approach into Exeter, and I'm watching that on the moving map display, of course, so we should be okay. The woods and the forests all around are pretty accurately depicted as well. The smaller trees that run alongside roads and hedgerows and whatever are of course auto-generated. They won't look exactly the same, but they certainly are close enough. It's a bit like the houses in some of the villages and whatever as well. They're in the right location. They won't look exactly the same as the house that's there in real life, but the location of them is pretty much spot on. So in a minute I'm going to be flying over the city of Exeter, which will certainly give the auto-generated scenery something to think about. It's a fairly large built-up area. It'll be interesting to see how we handle it. One thing I do think could withstand some improvement. This is not a comment on Tony's scenery, by the way. This is just a general improvement for X-Plane 10. The roads always seem far too dark to me, and indeed when you compare them with what appears on the photographic scenery, they're very obviously too dark. So I think a more washed out, a more lived with colour would be far more appropriate for the UK. So if anybody is keen to do anything with scenery in X-Plane, I think that could be a dramatically positive improvement. Okay, looking ahead off to the right now, over there, that is Exeter, the conurbation that you can see over here. Now you can see there perhaps in the distance it's starting to populate with buildings now as we get closer. So I think what I'll do here is I'm going to slow down a bit and descend as well, and let's see how much we can see of Exeter closer to the ground. This is going to test my helicopter flying skills now, that's for sure. Well, you can see the density of the housing here for yourself, and so far the frames have dropped down to around 20 frames per second here, so we're certainly working quite hard to generate this scenery. Oops, see I'm flying very much out of balance there. Let's try and correct that. So we're down to around 16 frames per second now. Still seems to be working quite well though. And just in case you wonder as we're flying along here what my settings are, let's have a quick look. Those are the rendering options that I'm using. As you can see, I've turned off HDR rendering because for me that's the biggest frames per second hoover that I've got on my particular system. I'm sure yours might be similar, although with all the different setups available, who knows what works where. I've got my number of trees set to the absolute maximum, as I have for objects, as I have for number of roads. Number of cars, not too many. What else can I say here? Not a lot really. I'm not using any weather, so the clouds detail isn't really relevant to what I'm doing. Yeah, so one final thing I guess I'd point out here is it says the size of all loaded textures is about 1.5 gig. And I've got a 2 GB VRAM card. So I'm certainly not extending beyond the boundaries of my card at the moment. I'm able to manage things fairly well, and with that kind of setup, as you can see at the moment, overflying a city in the UK, I'm getting 16 frames per second. So let's carry on. You see the quality of the housing and everything for yourself here. Again, very British looking, which I think is exactly the effect that Tony is trying for. We're down to about 14 frames per second now, and you can probably notice some stuttering now. It's not quite as smooth as it is when I'm flying along at 45 frames per second. Obviously there's some strange graphic effects going on. You can see here on the roof of that building, on the front of that building over there to our left. Still, this is 500 feet above the city itself. Well, that's an interesting effect here, like an island in the middle of the river. This would be the River X here, I imagine. And I'm sure if houses are drawn there, then they are there in real life. In fact, you can see on the photo scenery that it is depicting some objects along those sections. See here, massive houses in this area. Some very nice detail on some of these as well. So ahead of us there you can just make out Exeter Airport. just there. So I'll attempt to put my Bell helicopter safely down there. And I have to say, whilst taking off in a helicopter is hard, trying to land it is a whole extra level of difficulty, and it's something that I have to say I enjoy practicing because it's a great challenge, and that's part of the reason why we become immersed in our hobby, because we get challenged by things and we want to improve. If you're looking for a new challenge, helicopter flying is definitely the place to do it. Okay, so ordinarily I wouldn't be flying above Exeter at 500 feet before coming in to land at the airport. I'll be doing a far more sensible and reasonable approach. So I guess there must be a little bit of wind here that's blowing me to the left. The helicopter doesn't really seem to want to track straight to the runway. Currently at around 50 knots, and the taxiing speed, I think we want to get down to around walking speed. Though I have seen some videos where people talk about 40-40. That's 40 feet above the ground at 40 knots. I'm not sure what that's used for. Those numbers, I'm sure it's not for taxiing. That sounds far too fast, but if you know, please leave me a comment below. I should be interested to learn a bit more. Okay, so we seem to be on the glide slope here, so let's reduce speed a bit. Down a bit further. Turn the nose around towards the runway. A bit of judicious left boot. Apparently I'm a bit low according to the Pappy, although with the helicopter that's less of an issue. I'm going to slow down now by pulling back on the nose. Oops. Sounding too happy there, was it? Slowed down too quickly. So I'm down to 0 long before the runway. Oh well, let's continue taking it in. Oops. And slow down now then. Back on the throttle, pull back on the stick, slow us down. That's better. And let's taxi away to the left. That's the main runway. It's a bit better. Well, it'd be better if I managed to stay above the taxiway, wouldn't it? Okay, let's try and bring it back along, line it up. It's a bit better. So I'm a big follower of Flight Sim 481, if you've seen any of his videos. He's very adept at taking an aircraft, taking off, flying it around and plonking it on the ground. And I said to him one day that he was exceptionally good at it, and how did he manage it? And he said, I just keep doing it all the time. I always think that performing a takeoff without doing a landing is a bit of a cheat. So I thought, well, that sounds like good advice, and maybe I should follow that. So there you are, landing at Exeter Airport with the Bell 407 from Dreamfoil Creations. And a big thank you to Tony Wobb from World to X-Plane for the GB Pro version 0.1 scenery, which has been the subject of this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If you have, please subscribe. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. Maybe you'd like to click on the like button as well if it's been useful to you, to help spread the word for the channel. As ever, thanks very much for watching. I look forward to metaphorically meeting you next time.